Pay close attention to what I'm about to reveal, because your financial assets depend strictly on you understanding the true engineering of this impending warning. Forget the optimistic narratives, the promises of recovery, and any idea that this video is empty speculation or mere internet sensationalism. What you are about to hear is the anatomy of a mathematical collapse that has already begun, a silent implosion that the mainstream media categorically refuses to report to avoid a mass bank run. The false sense of security that the average person breathes daily is just a thin veil covering the most severe liquidity evaporation of this decade. The pillars of the financial system are fractured, and while the vast majority continue to blindly believe in institutional guarantees, the true insiders are already strategically moving their capital out of the impact zone. The definitive proof that we are not dealing with a conspiracy theory materialized violently in early 2024 when New York Community Bancorp was forced to reveal its deep accounting wounds. Abruptly, the institution cut its dividends by more than 70%, reporting massive losses tied to commercial real estate properties. This event was not a mere market hiccup, but rather the first heartbeat of a systemic death spiral. To avoid immediate bankruptcy, the bank needed $1 billion emergency capital injection led by Liberty Strategic Capital. The mainstream press treated the episode as an isolated case, a temporary managerial anomaly. However, we know that this $1 billion bailout was merely a desperate attempt to stem the bleeding of a regional banking system that is secretly bleeding to death under the weight of utterly rotten assets. The true magnitude of this financial abyss is hidden in reports that most have purposefully ignored. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation has reported consecutive and alarming increases in its restricted list of troubled banks, accumulating dozens of institutions with billions in assets at risk of insolvency, keeping the names in absolute secrecy to avoid widespread panic in the streets. The final trigger of this structural catastrophe is the monstrous wall of commercial real estate maturities, where approximately $2 trillion in debt are brutally due by 2027. These are not numbers thrown to the wind. They are real liabilities originated at extremely low interest rates that now face a reinforced concrete wall of expensive refinancing. The clock is ticking relentlessly against these financial institutions, and the systemic trap is set to capture and annihilate the wealth of those who lack the strategic clarity to anticipate the shock. To understand the magnitude of this systemic trap, you need to swallow the red pill of bank accounting and see the illusion that sustains the system. The main cog that broke down, and that no one dares to admit, is called the fiction of amortized cost versus the harsh reality of mark-to-market. The financial system operates under a regulated mathematical fantasy, where the security perceived by the public is built on foundations of sand. Regional banks, which today hold about 70% of all commercial real estate loans in the United States, are technically bankrupt. They hide trillion-dollar holes in their balance sheets using accounting rules that mask structural insolvency. This is not a passing liquidity problem that the Federal Reserve can fix with marginal interest rate cuts, but a silent financial gangrene that corrodes bank capital day after day. Imagine the banking system as a vast network of underground pipes in a large metropolis, designed to withstand constant and predictable water pressure. Currently, the pipes are clogged with toxic waste from commercial mortgage lending, but the surface remains intact only because maximum pressure has not yet been triggered. Regulators allow these financial institutions to keep these bad loans on their balance sheets at the original contract value, as long as the borrower continues to pay the monthly interest. This maneuver is the true silent receivership, a regulatory tolerance that postpones the inevitable. The plumbing is about to burst under the sidewalk, but the authorities smile at the population, saying that the supply is normal. This regulatory complacency transforms real and immediate losses into phantom losses, creating a legion of zombie banks walking towards the unavoidable accounting abyss. The inevitability of this mathematical implosion has a set date and goes by the name of the commercial real estate market's debt wall. Between 2024 and 2027, a colossal volume, ranging from $1.5 to $2 trillion in structural debt for commercial and multifamily buildings, will need to be refinanced. The great systemic trap lies in the fact that the overwhelming majority of these loans originated in an era of free money, with interest rates artificially floating in the range of 3 to 4%. Now, these same debtors face a draconian reality, forced to roll over their debts with financing costs that represent double or triple the original rates. It's an equation impossible to solve. The insolvency clock ticks with each contract that expires, pushing the first of a lethal series of dominoes towards the ground. When this refinancing shock hits the real world, the accounting fiction of amortized cost immediately disintegrates in the face of undeniable facts. Debtors look at their assets and realize that commercial properties, especially large buildings in New York and New Jersey, are now worth 20 to 40% less than at the time of purchase. With the cost of debt exploding and the asset value melting away, the rational owner makes the only logical decision possible. He simply hands over the keys to the bank and declares absolute default. In that exact millisecond, the regulatory magic loses its anesthetic effect on the balance sheet. The phantom loss, until then hidden in the denial of quarterly reports, suddenly transforms into a real, quantifiable, and devastating loss. The illusion quickly evaporates, revealing the true face of a structural crisis. The direct result of the massive handover of these keys is the instant and violent obliteration of the capital of one of these regional American banks. To understand the level of panic behind the scenes, know that the FDIC's insurance fund does not possess sufficient financial reserves to simultaneously liquidate all the dozens of insolvent institutions already on its secret list of trouble banks. This is why regulators keep these zombified structures on life support, operating under confidential consent orders far from the eyes of the general public. If they revealed the mark-to-market valuation of assets today, we would have the largest bank run in modern history, instantly destroying credit. The system is broken from within, and the government is bluffing with ordinary depositors' money to buy time while it structures a disguised bailout. This perverse dynamic creates what we call the perfect systemic trap, where central authorities are trapped in a dark, inescapable labyrinth. If the Federal Reserve acts rigorously and enforces the marking of assets to market today, hundreds of regional banks will close their doors next Monday, triggering rampant collapse. If, on the other hand, the central bank decides not to enforce this transparency, these institutions will continue to slowly bleed capital behind the scenes of regulation. This constant bleeding forces banks to drastically cut lending to the real economy, suffocating viable businesses and paralyzing economic growth for an entire decade. The intelligent individual realizes that, regardless of the corrupt system's choice, the fate is irrevocably sealed. The only genuine defense against this broken machine is cold, calculating, and anticipatory knowledge of this impending catastrophe. To understand the sheer gravity of this systemic trap, we need to tear down the curtain of collective amnesia and look directly at the ghosts of the financial past. The scenario of evaporating liquidity we are witnessing now is not an unprecedented anomaly, but an exact carbon copy of the devastating savings and loan crisis that obliterated the market in the 1980s. The historical logic is cold, relentless, and irrefutable. It happened before. The mathematical signs were rigorously the same, and those who chose to ignore the warnings lost absolutely everything. In that dark period, the American government deliberately allowed thousands of insolvent institutions to continue operating under criminal regulatory leniency, simply because the Federal Insurance Fund was completely bankrupt and unable to cover the losses. Investors who believed the narratives of the mainstream media were financially massacred. The pattern of destruction is always identical, following a choreographed script to keep the herd calm while the slaughterhouse is prepared. The first phase of this programmed implosion is overt institutional denial. Today, just as in 1980, central authorities go on television to categorically state that the banking system is perfectly sound, highly resilient, and totally safe. Behind these empty, mendacious statements, the silent and deadly second phase occurs, the infamous operational receivership, where regulators assume absolute control behind the scenes. We see this unfolding now through brutal dividend cuts of around 70%, sudden changes of financial directors in the dead of night, and highly dilutive capital injections. The illusion of normality is artificially maintained only to trap the average citizen in this systemic trap without any chance of escape. The third and most brutal stage of this historical death spiral is the dreaded controlled collapse, a macabre financial engineering feat executed when markets are closed. Just as in the bloody past, smaller, completely insolvent regional banks will be forced to merge with colossal institutions during those dark weekends. The worker who trusted the system wakes up on Monday to find that the rules of the game have been unilaterally rewritten. The intelligent individual realizes that those who held deposits above the insured limit and chose to ignore the obvious warning signs suffered the devastating haircut, a summary confiscation of a large portion of their hard-earned wealth. This is the exorbitant price paid for willful ignorance and blind faith in a broken system that will always prioritize self-preservation over individual financial well-being. Your current fear is absolutely justified, grounded in numerical facts, and not in unfounded collective hysteria. History teaches us, with impressive pedagogical cruelty, that the evaporation of liquidity does not issue prime-time warnings before delivering its fatal blow. When the great corporate dominoes collapse, wealth does not disappear into a vacuum. It is simply transferred abruptly from the hands of the unwary to the pockets of well-positioned strategists. We are witnessing the exact replay of a financial catastrophe that has already claimed millions in savings and careers in the past. The tension between the intelligent individual and the corrupt state machine has never been as palpable as in this critical moment of 2024 and beyond. It remains to be seen whether you will be just another statistic of collateral damage on the broken balance sheet of the FDIC or an armored survivor. The great lie that the mainstream media injects daily into the public mind is the blind belief that the government cavalry will always arrive in time for the rescue. However, the undeniable mathematical truth is that the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury are trapped in a perfect institutional trap, definitively caught between a rock and a hard place. This time, they lack the financial ammunition or accounting flexibility to save the day without destroying what remains of our real economy. Unlike the crises of 2008 or 2020, when the government could simply print trillions of dollars with impunity to stem the bleeding, the scenario for 2024 and beyond presents an inflationary bill that has already been brutally collected. The state machine has exhausted all its magical tricks of artificial liquidity, leaving the average citizen completely vulnerable to the rapidly approaching evaporation of liquidity. If the American Central Bank attempts to intervene directly to cover this $1.50 to $2 trillion black hole in the commercial real estate market, the immediate consequence will be the total obliteration of the currency's purchasing power. Attempting to bail out hundreds of regional banks simultaneously would require such an obscene injection of liquidity that it would reignite the furnace of rampant inflation, rapidly sending price indices back to levels of 10 to 15% per year. Inflation would not be a mere transitory side effect, but rather a permanent death spiral that would pulverize the middle class in a matter of months. The bailout of bankrupt regional bankers would be entirely financed by the silent destruction of their wages and savings, proving that any attempt at a system-imposed solution only creates an infinitely more devastating monster. On the other hand, if the authorities choose not to interfere and decide not to print this new money, the blade of the sword will fall on the credit market with unprecedented violence. The accounting collapse will force the immediate liquidation of these zombie banks, triggering a domino effect that will paralyze 70% of credit concessions to small and medium-sized businesses in the United States. Refusal to rescue the system would generate a destructive deflation of assets and an overwhelming wave of chained corporate bankruptcies. It is at this exact moment that the systemic trap closes completely on the head of the inattentive investor, revealing that structural bankruptcy is no longer a distant possibility, but an unavoidable mathematical certainty. The banking system was designed to feed itself, and when this flow abruptly ceases, the entire economy suffers a fatal heart attack. Intelligent individuals need to understand viscerally that, faced with this unsolvable mathematical failure, the large banks considered too big to fail will act as ruthless predators. When the insolvency crisis becomes public and the great run on regional banks begins, the government's first reaction will not be to protect you, but rather to implement draconian capital control mechanisms. We will see strict limits on daily withdrawals, a freeze on electronic transfers, and the terrifying possibility of internal bailouts, where your own deposited money will be forcibly converted into worthless shares of an already bankrupt bank. The illusion of liquidity will evaporate in a matter of hours during a fateful weekend, leaving millions of people trapped on the wrong side of the locked doors of financial institutions, begging for access to their own funds that the system will vehemently refuse to grant. There is no happy ending orchestrated by suited bureaucrats or megacorporations that today feign stability on the nightly news. The visceral reality is that global governments have traded the bitter cure of a purifying recession for a chronic and terminal illness of unpayable institutional debt. Collapse is not a flaw in the current system. It is the perfectly predictable consequence of decades of accounting negligence and criminal monetary policy that has exclusively benefited the corporate elite. You are alone in this financial trench, and expecting the problem to magically resolve itself through the benevolence of politicians or central bankers is to sign your own financial death certificate. The tension between the corrupt state machine and your financial survival has reached a breaking point. The implosion is structural, the accounting clock has run out, and the only way out lies in immediate tactical positioning. The time has come to abandon the paralysis of fear and take absolute control of your financial destiny through three crucial asymmetrical moves. The reward for your rigorous attention so far is the practical knowledge that separates the victims of the system from those who profit from the chaos. Your first tactical step, immediate defense, requires the drastic and ruthless reduction of any exposure to unsecured bank credit. Intelligent capital doesn't bleed along with fools. It migrates to impenetrable security. You must immediately move all corporate and personal liquidity, especially amounts above the $250,000 limit, directly into Treasury money market funds, or T-bills. These direct U.S. Treasury bonds offer premium yields with absolutely zero credit risk from the corrupt commercial banking system, shielding your assets and ensuring survival. Once your financial base is completely shielded against implosion, we begin the visceral attack phase against the system itself. The second asymmetrical move focuses on the debt market, which at this very moment is pricing in the risk of collapse in a brutal and totally disproportionate way. The real opportunity to profit exponentially lies in the tactical purchase of subordinated debt at deep discounts, sweeping up the bottom of the barrel left by amateur investors running in panic. Your target is not the zombie banks about to die, but rather those few regional institutions that possess fortified balance sheets, robust capital, and enough predatory capacity to survive the massacre. These stronger entities will inevitably absorb the weak ones for pennies, and by acquiring their subordinated debt today, you guarantee massive returns while the accounting carnage obliterates the weakest players on the financial chessboard. The third and most devastating counterflow tactic directly exploits the epicenter of the real estate crisis that caused the systemic trap. While the evaporation of liquidity suffocates traditional operators, you must allocate your offensive capital to exclusive distressed real estate funds. When regulators finally force the inevitable liquidation of zombie banks, the market will be flooded with commercial properties that have no natural buyers. It is in this environment of pure panic that these vulture funds will snap up majestic class of commercial buildings at judicial auctions for mere pennies. You will not be buying the problem, but acquiring the physical infrastructure of New York and New Jersey at structural cost. Public fear is the raw material of asymmetric profit, transforming the disgrace of the failed accounting model into the unshakable foundation of your new crisis-immune wealth empire. The perfect storm we just dissected isn't an isolated event that will end tomorrow morning. It's ground zero of a global financial restructuring that will ruthlessly purge the unwary. As long as the mainstream media continues to operate as the PR arm of a failed system, selling the false illusion of stability, you'll need a beacon of continuous intelligence to navigate this evaporation of liquidity. Smart capital doesn't survive on a single revelation. It requires real-time tactical monitoring. That's precisely why you shouldn't just skip this video, but subscribe to this channel right now. We are your sentinel against institutional disinformation, bringing you the raw data, the decoding of confidential reports, and survival strategies before panic hits the streets and ATMs are blocked by central authorities. Being a member of this community means you'll receive critical alerts the instant the next banking domino silently tumbles over the weekend. We'll continue to meticulously monitor the confidential expansion of the FDIC's trouble bank list and catastrophic commercial real estate maturities, ensuring you're never caught off guard. The window of opportunity to protect your assets and position yourself to profit from the accounting implosion is closing extremely rapidly. When the harsh reality of mark-to-market is finally forced upon these zombie regional banks, chaos will reign for the average citizen, but we'll already be positioned on the winning side. Sign up and enable notifications to secure the asymmetric informational advantage absolutely necessary to thrive unwaveringly during the greatest financial and structural purge of our current generation. Now that you deeply understand the lethal mechanics of this silent receivership and the true self-preservation intentions of the financial system, theory must be immediately transformed into tactical action. Information without proper practical execution is merely futile entertainment, and we are not here to entertain, but to forge survivors and elite strategists. Systemic collapse will make no distinction between those who simply ignored the warnings and those who understood the danger but were paralyzed by the fear of execution. Every day you keep your emergency reserves locked in financial institutions exposed to commercial credit risk is another day playing Russian roulette with the sweat of your entire life. The accounting clock is ticking, and inertia is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most destructive decision you can make at this historic and decisive moment. To consolidate this tactical intelligence and strengthen our community of armored strategists, I need you to go down to the comments section now and answer a strictly personal question. Coldly assessing your current protection structure, what is your real exposure to regional and commercial banks at this very moment? And which of the three asymmetrical moves discussed today will you implement first to protect your capital from confiscation? Have you already started migrating your liquidity to zero-risk treasury assets? Or do you still trust the false guarantees provided by desperate bureaucrats? The debate in the comments is not merely a space for opinion, but a collaborative intelligence laboratory where we cross-reference data and financial contingency strategies. Write your answer with clinical clarity, as your practical stance may very well awaken and save another member of our trench. The systemic trap is perfectly set, and the gears of the death spiral are already silently grinding the capital of those who sleep soundly under the spell of the mainstream media. While the vast majority of the population is cruelly surprised by the sudden liquidity freeze and the meltdown of their savings, those who take an active and pragmatic stance will survive to inherit the shattered wealth of the ignorant. The broken system will inevitably exact its toll, but we categorically refuse to be the financial sacrifice that saves the necks of corrupt bankers and politicians. Keep your mind sharp, question absolutely all official government narratives, protect your real assets with unwavering ferocity, and remain vigilant alongside us in this continuous watch. We will see each other in the next strategic intelligence report before the accounting illusion definitively collapses on everyone's heads.